You answer softly even when something in you tenses. You say it's fine, though your hand stays still on the table. The person across from you looks relieved, not because you're okay, but because they are. That's the contradiction. Empathy is supposed to connect, but it can also be used to keep peace at your expense. They say, "I just need you to understand where I'm coming from." You do. You understand it too well. You start scanning for their stress before you even notice your own. The air between you carries all their feelings, and somehow none of yours. It starts small, giving comfort where it's not returned, offering patience that's never matched. The kindness feels like virtue until it drains you. That's when empathy turns into a quiet transaction, one person relieved, the other responsible. Someone once told you empathy can't be dangerous, but in practice it can be selective. Who's cared for? Who's forgiven? Who gets to stay comfortable? Used this way, it becomes a tool, not a bridge. Here's the paradox. The very sensitivity that makes you gentle can also make you compliant. You absorb more than you challenge. You soothe more than you speak. This isn't a failure of compassion. It's what happens when empathy is weaponized, when it stops being shared and starts being used. You've felt how care can turn into quiet pressure. The next part is about how it happens so easily. At first, emotional attunement feels like safety. You learn to notice tone shifts, silences, the small pauses that tell you what someone needs. It feels like fluency, reading a room before a word is spoken. But when that skill starts to manage outcomes instead of deepen truth, the balance changes. They might say, "You're so good at knowing what people need." You take it as praise. Later, it becomes expectation. You start adjusting your reactions to prevent theirs. You soften your words to keep things calm. You apologize first, even when you're not sure what went wrong. That's how attunement turns. It becomes a loop. The more you anticipate, the less they have to ask. The less they ask, the less you say no. On the surface, everyone looks kind. Underneath, only one person's comfort decides the rhythm. The mechanism is simple but invisible. Understanding becomes leverage. When one person knows how to soothe, they can also steer. They don't need to demand outright, just to let their disappointment linger until you fix it. You call it sensitivity. In truth, it's training. Psychologists call this contingent empathy, care given only when behavior aligns with someone else's emotional terms. It rewards compliance and punishes self-direction. In daily life, it looks like being valued most when you're agreeable. That's the softest trap: control without cruelty, dependence disguised as connection. You keep the peace by carrying it. What looks like harmony is often maintenance, and what feels like closeness can quietly erase choice. You already know the feeling of being read too closely. This one is about when that reading becomes a tactic. They watch how your shoulders tighten when the topic shifts. They note how quickly you reassure, how you reach for repair before blame settles. To them, these are not signs of care, they're coordinates. Pain becomes a map of what you'll do to avoid losing calm. It can sound harmless at first. I just know you so well. But the knowing isn't mutual. They use what they've learned about your thresholds, the tone that softens you, the silence that makes you feel it, the phrase that keeps you explaining. Each reaction gives them data. Each correction teaches them how to guide the next exchange. Empathy, in its healthy form, stays present with discomfort. Strategic empathy skips that part. It observes, categorizes, and then acts to secure an outcome. That outcome might be forgiveness, loyalty, or quiet obedience, whatever keeps their world steady. The irony is that this kind of insight looks like intimacy from the outside. You hear people say, "They're so emotionally intelligent," and they are, just not in the way that heals. It's fluency without compassion, precision without care. You start noticing how conflict resolves faster, but only in their favor. How apologies end with you proving your goodwill. You start anticipating their emotional weather the way sailors read tides, trying to stay afloat, not free. The literal truth is that your openness has been repurposed into a guidebook. This pattern thrives where vulnerability is one-sided. The one who studies learns control. The one who shares learns dependence. The more transparent you are, the easier it is to be managed. That's the shift. Empathy turned into prediction. Prediction turned into power. They no longer need to ask what hurts. They already know, and knowing becomes the method. It doesn't look like cruelty. It looks like understanding used as leverage. And the closer it feels, the harder it is to see the distance inside it. Notice how it builds, the quiet fatigue that comes from holding everyone's temperature but your own. This part is about what it costs to know too much. At first, it seems like care. You listen closely. You translate moods. You fill silences with reassurance. People call you grounding, thoughtful, easy to be around. But inside, you start keeping score of every sigh, every half-finished sentence, every shift in tone. The day becomes a constant scan for tension, and you mistake that vigilance for love. You wake up already braced. Small conflicts feel larger because they signal danger, not difference. You tell yourself it's empathy, but what you're really tracking is permission. Permission to relax, to speak, to exist without managing. When someone else's comfort sets the limit, your awareness becomes a cage built from care. You might try to explain it. "I just feel everything too deeply." They nod, maybe even admire it. But the truth is simpler. Feeling too much for others leaves too little for yourself. The emotional circuits burn out. You stop recognizing what's yours to hold. The exhaustion shows up in small ways first. You cancel plans without naming why. You go quiet mid-conversation because there's nothing left to give. You start mistaking calm for connection because calm is the only thing you can still control. Empathy without boundaries isn't compassion, it's absorption. It replaces mutual exchange with silent labor, a kind of invisible caretaking that never ends. And the deeper you understand someone else, the less room there seems to be for your own contradictions. That's where the weight settles, in the gap between knowing and being known. You've become fluent in everyone's language except your own. It's not that you care too much, it's that you were never taught that care has to include you, too. Here's what happens when connection becomes performance. This one is about the moment empathy stops being shared and starts being used to steer. They say, "I just want what's best for you," and on the surface, it sounds kind. But you can feel the shape beneath it, the unspoken belief that they know better, that your comfort is their territory. When empathy detaches from respect, it stops being care and turns into management. You notice it in small ways first. Advice delivered as certainty, concern that comes with a condition. The conversation framed so your agreement looks like understanding. You want to believe it's generosity, but it leaves no space for your own sense of truth. Empathy, at its core, is supposed to meet another person as they are. But once it begins to define rather than witness, it crosses into control. The intent may sound benevolent, but the result is hierarchy. One person gets to feel wise, the other is cast as fragile, in need of correction disguised as protection. They might say, "I just don't want you to get hurt." You nod, because resisting care feels ungrateful. Later, you realize that what they're offering isn't safety, it's supervision. The hidden exchange is compliance for comfort, obedience for peace. That's how weaponized empathy sustains itself. It rewards surrender and calls it love. Even those who use it often believe they're helping. The manipulation isn't always conscious. Sometimes it's a habit built from fear. Fear that if you don't guide others, you'll lose them. So control wears the mask of compassion, and care becomes a system of permissions. Notice what happens when you stop absorbing and start reflecting. When empathy meets autonomy, it doesn't fold, it expands. It allows both people to stand in their own truth without one eclipsing the other. When it clicks, you stop chasing harmony at the cost of honesty. You start to see that real empathy isn't soft, it's steady. It doesn't avoid conflict, it holds space for difference without forcing resolution. The moment someone's care requires your compliance, it's no longer empathy, it's persuasion dressed as kindness. That's the mirror that pushes back, the kind of understanding that doesn't blur your outline, but clarifies it. Because care without respect becomes control, and respect without care becomes distance. The balance lives in the space between, the one where both people get to stay whole. You've seen how empathy can bend into obedience. Now it's time to see what that bending costs. When you spend years adjusting to other people's comfort, trust starts to hollow out. Not because anyone betrayed you outright, but because your own signals no longer register as reliable. You second-guess what you want before you even form it. You rehearse how to sound easy, calm, agreeable. Connection becomes performance, a version of you fine-tuned for their approval. Over time, identity thins. You still respond to questions, still show up where you're expected, but there's less behind the response. It's not burnout exactly, it's erosion. You lose the friction that makes choice feel real. When everything depends on keeping the peace, you stop believing peace can include you. In institutions, the same dynamic scales up. Teams call it alignment, families call it harmony, companies call it culture. But underneath, it's the same principle. Emotional adaptation rewarded more than honesty. The group stays calm, but the individuals shrink. The quiet ones get praised for patience. The outspoken ones learn to filter until the message disappears. Trust withers here because trust requires risk, and adaptation leaves no room for risk. Every reaction becomes calculation. What to reveal, what to withhold, what won't disrupt the balance. You end up relating through prediction, not presence. The cost is subtle but steep, the slow separation from your own internal reference. Without that, empathy loses its anchor. It turns into shape-shifting, a survival skill mistaken for virtue. You can't build true connection by disappearing inside it. And when caring blindly becomes the norm, even love starts to sound like negotiation. At first it seems safer to stay open, to prove you're kind by never resisting. But that kind of openness turns brittle. Here's what changes when empathy becomes a choice instead of a reflex. You start by pausing before you rush to understand. You ask, does this feeling belong to me? Sometimes it doesn't. That question alone begins to separate care from control. Boundaries are not distance, they're structure. They tell you where you end and someone else begins, so what you offer can stay voluntary. At first, people notice the difference. Someone may ask, "You're quieter lately. Are you okay?" You are. You're just listening differently, no longer translating every signal into duty. The silence between you starts to feel clean again, not tense. Reclaiming empathy this way feels awkward at first. The old reflexes still twitch. You want to fix, to smooth, to reassure. But you let discomfort hang a little longer, trusting that honesty is a better kindness. When empathy meets boundaries, it stops draining you and starts grounding you. You begin to see that saying no can also be an act of respect. It keeps your care from turning into rescue. It lets others grow their own resilience instead of leaning on yours. And it reminds you that being compassionate doesn't mean being available to every demand. The difference is dignity, yours and theirs. Dignity gives empathy a shape. It turns it from an endless offering into a shared space where both people can stay whole. Real connection doesn't need your exhaustion to prove it's real. It needs your presence, intact and willing, not worn down by obligation. That's the recovery, empathy that includes you too. You've felt how easily care can twist into control. Now comes the part that steadies it again. Not fixing is harder than it sounds. You hear someone's pain and every instinct says do something. But real empathy isn't rescue, it's presence. It's the steadiness of staying near what hurts without turning it into a task. When you stop absorbing, the room feels different. You can listen without shrinking. You can witness without shaping. The other person begins to hear their own thoughts again, because you're not filling the space with solutions. This is what respect inside empathy looks like: attention without ownership, compassion without command. It's quieter and slower, and often misunderstood as detachment. But it's the opposite. It's trust. The belief that another person can face their own experience and still be whole. True empathy doesn't dissolve you into someone else's feeling. It stands beside it. It doesn't decide what should happen next. It honors what is already happening. That's the quiet strength of not fixing, the courage to let care stay witness, not weapon. You already know the difference now, the weight of care that controls and the kind that frees. This last part is about keeping that awareness alive together. In daily life, it's small choices that protect compassion. Let silence breathe before you rush to soothe. Ask permission before offering help. Notice when listening turns into fixing, and step back without shame. These pauses don't make you cold. They make your empathy precise. You might start to see it around you. People who care deeply yet stay centered. Conversations that hold honesty without fear. That's how empathy repairs itself, one boundary at a time, until connection feels mutual again. The truth is, you don't have to lose yourself to stay kind. Care can coexist with clarity. Feeling deeply doesn't mean surrendering direction. That awareness itself is the beginning of trust. You've done enough for today. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and let the rest settle in quiet. If this helped you see your empathy differently, share it with someone who might need that steadiness too. See you on the next episode.